Lost Sisters, Cynthia and Sandra. During Silver and my mother's years on the lam from the law in Mexico, my sisters, Cynthia and Sandra, were born. They are dual Mexico-USA citizens as a result. I was born shortly after they had returned to the States, after my father felt the heat had died down. I never knew many details about Cynthia being molested as a girl and photographed naked, playing with one of her friends by a pedophile. But I had heard the story. The man had been discovered and convicted in court, but Cynthia was forced to testify. Cynthia contends that the experience messed her up forever, and therefore she is not responsible for anything that happened in her life or any of her decisions. I refuse to accept her denial of responsibility. We all have challenges in life and we must all cope and overcome them. I accept she had a horrible thing happen to her, but it doesn't justify anything. My other biological sister, Sandra, seemed delusional at times, standing up to Cynthia, who towered almost 6 feet tall and had broad shoulders like a combat fighter. Cynthia was tough like her father, Silver, and she was crazy like him too. Cynthia would smack and shove Sandra when things became so intense for Cynthia that she couldn't handle and process it anymore. At which time Sandra would recognize that she was 5'3", was not nearly as big or strong as Cynthia, and then Sandra would run. But like a lion in chase, Cynthia would pursue. Occasionally, things got so out of control that Cynthia would lose her sanity and grab weapons, whatever was on hand or nearby, and she would threaten and occasionally even use them on Sandra. On one fateful morning, I heard screaming and yelling. Sandra was standing in front of Cynthia yelling at her and saying that she was not afraid. Sandra was almost a foot shorter than Cynthia. Cynthia had Silver's broad shoulders and was a strong woman. She would likely deck most men in a fight. She was vicious. She was crazy. I believe that no one should ever mess with my sister Cynthia, much less challenge her. Well, Sandra was in her face ranting, insulting, and damning her. Cynthia flipped out. She grabbed a kitchen butcher knife and chased Sandra outside and up the street through a neighbor's house into a big walnut orchard that was behind our house in San Martin. Police by then had been called and they intercepted Cynthia in the orchard. Cynthia would not listen to them. They were forced to tase her to bring her down, but apparently they said she must have been on LSD or some crazy empowering drug. She was so resistant to the taser that the second taser had to be used on her, finally dropping her to the ground incapacitated. That was not the only challenges Cynthia faced. Cynthia one time snuck into my mother's bedroom and picked a lock on a little file safe that she had. Inside her file safe, though, she had something very different than a file. She had a Colt .45 pistol with a clip and bullets. My mother had bought that pistol after she had been raped years ago. She locked it away so it was available to her, but she hoped she would never need it again. But her rape and my kidnapping had made her think guns were necessary for people that were not as strong as others. My mother was a weak person and she concluded she needed a gun. Cynthia inanely thought that she should brandish the pistol during a Dine and Dash episode at a local Carl's Jr. restaurant in Morgan Hill, California. She accidentally dropped, though, the pistol as she was leaving, and the restaurant manager jumped and actually got the pistol. He pointed back at Cynthia and her cronies. They were caught. They called the police. Cynthia and her friends were arrested for felony possession of firearms, and for Cynthia, a stolen firearm, armed robbery of a restaurant. My mother posted bail and paid Cynthia's fines. But my mother could not serve time for Cynthia. Cynthia had ended up only a few weeks in jail and a few years in probation. It must be apparent now that Cynthia has led a very troubled life with serious emotional and mental challenges. She grew marijuana on her windowsill to ensure she always had some weed so she could self-medicate. She would share her weed with her horse, named Lightning, to get the horse high like her. The horse would walk funny, almost stumbling a bit, but Cynthia liked her horse sharing her experiences. I thought it was wrong. The horse had no choice in the matter. It clearly adversely affected that horse, but there was nothing I could do about it. Cynthia was determined to prove she was right to stay out late, not attend school, and do whatever she ever wanted. If my parents ever disagreed, she would just move out. She would swear. One day when Cynthia was so clearly high on drugs, she got into an argument about her independence and walked out, declaring that she would really leave. She left the house in rebellion but had nowhere to go. She slept in my mother's pickup camper for a week, trying to prove that she was serious. In a way, it did work. My parents agreed that she would no longer have a curfew, but they did expect she should still attend school. She did not. They never followed through on any of their punitive actions. Cynthia flunked out of high school. Later, she was able to pass a General Equivalency Diploma exam, or GED. It was something that a student can acquire to graduate without fulfilling the actual proper coursework or getting a formal high school diploma. Cynthia made things much worse yet on a fateful Friday night partying with a new boyfriend. She could not remember the man's name, if she ever even knew it. Cynthia liked to sleep around, frequently. She and the man that she was partying with that night, with recreational drug cocktails, things went bad. Paramedics speculated that she must have imbibed a mix of heroin, cocaine, marijuana, and some combination of amphetamines and then barbiturates. Her brain stopped working in the ambulance. She was clinically dead with no brain signal for over 30 seconds. They declared her dead. But somehow the paramedics, in their efforts, she came back. They managed to resuscitate Cynthia, though they thought they had failed. They thought she was dead. Cynthia's brain was damaged, though. She saw God come down on sunbeams from the clouds. God would tell her things thereafter. She talked to rose bushes, and apparently they talked back. On her birthday, she declared that I was the devil, and the cake that I had given her for her birthday was poisoned, regardless of the fact that I ate it myself, for which she demanded and asserted I must have an antidote. And if I did not give it to her, she could not eat it. Frustrated with good deeds that I ever tried to do for my sister, rejected repeatedly, I left. My sister could have her birthday without me. She could have her birthday cake if she ever decided to. One drunken night, Cynthia and her latest boyfriend were loud and raucous in the trailer that they lived in behind my mother's house. She would, in the future, convert a garage into an apartment for Cynthia to live in. But let's get back to the story at hand. My mother has spent her life giving to Cynthia as if she owed her something out of some deep guilt that I have never understood the cause of or source of. I will never know why she has treated Cynthia so differently than my sister Sandra or me. Cynthia and her boyfriend were boisterous, but their fun turned dark when her boyfriend screamed so loudly and forcefully that everyone heard it. Everybody ran to see what had happened. Cynthia had stabbed him in the leg near his thigh, close to his femoral artery. Had she nicked it, he would surely be dead. In panic, my mother called 911. Ambulances arrived quickly and they rescued the boyfriend. The police arrested my sister. Cynthia spent a few days in jail, but my mother bailed her out as soon as she was able to. It was too much money, though, so she had to use a bonds company. It took a few days. My mother always protected Cynthia from any consequence of her own actions. Cynthia was never taught to own her own behaviors and have consequences. However, Cynthia was, in this case, convicted of a felony for stabbing her boyfriend. It changed her life forever, having a felony. Her felony made her employability even less than it already was. Cynthia never grew up. She remained living with my mother into her 60s, and I believe still is. As she awaits my mother's eventual death so that she can inherit my mother's millions of dollars in her property, she has manipulated my mother with what is termed undue influence by law, so that my mother has, in her dementia, after an open heart surgery and coma, to change her will and testament to pretty much give Cynthia and her children everything that my mother and Sam had ever earned. So, the rest of her children, well, guess they don't matter anymore. The point here is that Cynthia remained the child in mind and responsibility throughout her entire life, following a major drug overdose that left her brain damaged. And now, being brain damaged, ironically, she's the caretaker for my dementia, brain damaged, or addled mother. In some ways, though, it did not matter that Cynthia never or maybe could not grow up. My mother espoused, no one should be expected to grow up or be responsible until they were 30 years old. At that time, they should have found themselves and be prepared to be productive workers in society. That's right, 30 years old. I believe the exact opposite of my mother. People should know what they want to do before they're 18 years old. And they should have a roadmap to achieve their goals by 18. By the time someone is 30 years old, if they have not already entered a profession that they are going to thrive and succeed in, then in my opinion, they were unlikely to ever be successful. If my success is a measure of my belief, then Cynthia's success is a measure of my mother's belief, and therefore the answer is clear. I was and am absolutely right.